The year was 72 after Aegon's conquest, when Daemon Targaryen first drew breath in the Red Keep of King's Landing. His father, Prince Balon the Brave, stood at the height of his power. His mother, Princess Alyssa, had already given House Targaryen one son. That son was Viserys, older by 3 years and already marked as special in the eyes of the court. Daemon arrived as the spare, the second son, the one who would stand forever in another's shadow. From his earliest days, Daemon understood what it meant to be second. When the lords came to pay homage, they bowed first to Viserys. When the Maesters spoke of the future, they spoke of Viserys. When their father smiled with pride, his eyes found Viserys first. It wasn't cruelty that placed Daemon in shadow. It was simply the way of things. The heir mattered. The spare existed in case the heir fell. But Daemon Targaryen was not a boy who accepted his place quietly. Even as a child, he burned with something the Maesters could not name. Ambition, some called it. Others whispered of something darker, something more dangerous. He had the Targaryen look, with pale hair that shone like silver in sunlight and eyes the colour of amethyst. His features were sharp and handsome, the kind that would one day make men follow him and women watch him with want. But it was not his beauty that set him apart. It was the fire that lived behind those purple eyes. His mother died when he was still young, giving birth to a third son who did not survive the night. Daemon remembered little of Alyssa, except the sound of her laughter and the way she moved through the world with a wildness that no lady of the court could match. She had ridden dragons and climbed towers and refused to be caged by the expectations placed upon her. Some said Daemon inherited more than just her silver hair. He inherited her refusal to bend. After Alyssa's death, Prince Balon retreated into duty and grief. The boys were raised by maesters and master-at-arms and the various lords and ladies who surrounded the royal family. Viserys grew into a careful, thoughtful boy who studied his lessons and sought to please those around him. He wanted to be worthy of the throne that might one day be his. He wanted to be good. Daemon wanted to be great. The difference between them showed early. In the training yard, Viserys practiced with the wooden swords until he achieved competence. Daemon practiced until his hands bled, then practiced more. He did not simply want to fight. He wanted to win. He wanted to be the best. When the master-at-arms praised Viserys for proper form, Daemon would challenge the older boys twice his size, driven by something the Maesters called recklessness, but that felt to Daemon like hunger. He was hungry for recognition, hungry for glory, hungry to prove that being second by birth did not mean being second in all things. The court learned quickly that Daemon Targaryen possessed a gift for winning people to his side. It was not just his royal blood or his striking looks. It was something in the way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he made those around him feel seen. When he smiled at a serving girl, she blushed. When he joked with a guard, the man stood taller. When he spoke to the sons of lesser lords, he made them feel like equals, like brothers in arms, like men who mattered. This charm would become his greatest weapon. But even then, those who watched closely saw something else beneath the surface. Daemon's mood shifted like summer storms. One moment he would be laughing and generous, buying drinks for the squires and making grand promises. The next, if someone slighted him or questioned his skill, his eyes would go cold, and his words would cut like Valyrian steel. He did not forgive easily. he did not forget at all. The relationship between the brothers remained strong through their childhood, though it was complicated in ways neither fully understood. Viserys loved Daemon. Of that there was no doubt. He defended him when others complained of his brother's wildness. He shared what was his, and tried to include Daemon in all things. But Viserys also carried the weight of being heir, and that weight created distance. He had responsibilities Daemon did not share. He had expectations Daemon would never face. For his part, Daemon loved his brother, but resented what Viserys represented. It wasn't Viserys' fault that he had been born first. It was not Viserys' fault that the throne would be his. But fault did not matter. The resentment lived in Daemon's chest regardless, a burning coal that never quite cooled. He told himself he did not want the throne. He told himself he wanted only to be his own man, to make his own name, to win glory on his own terms. But late at night, alone in his chambers, he wondered what it would feel like to be first, instead of second. The great turn in both their lives came when Daemon was still a young man. King Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, who had ruled Westeros for more than 50 years, finally began to fail. He was ancient, older than any king before him, and his mind had started to wander. The succession became the only thing that mattered in the realm. Prince Balon, as the king's chosen heir, stood ready to take the throne. And that meant Viserys would become heir to the heir. The crown was coming closer. But fate, as it often did in the world of ice and fire, had other plans. Prince Balon died suddenly, killed by a burst belly that no master could cure. The man who had seemed destined to be king never wore the crown. His death threw the succession into chaos. Jaehaerys, in his grief and failing mind, had to choose a new heir. The choice came down to two candidates: Viserys, son of the dead heir, or Princess Rhaenys' son, Laena, grandson of Jaehaerys' eldest son, who had died years before. The Great Council of 101 AC gathered at Harrenhal to decide. Lords from every corner of Westeros came to cast their votes. The debates raged for days. Some argued for Lenore, saying the throne should pass through the eldest line. Others argued for Viserys, saying that male succession was the tradition. In the end, the lords chose Viserys by a wide margin. The male line won over the female line. Viserys became heir to the Iron Throne, and Daemon became heir to the heir. For the first time in his life, Daemon stood one step from the crown. If something happened to Viserys before he had sons, Daemon would be king. It was a dangerous thought, the kind that could poison a man's mind if he let it. But for now, it filled Daemon with purpose. He was no longer just the spare. He was the spare to the throne itself. He mattered in a way he never had before. When Jaehaerys finally died in 103 AC, Viserys Targaryen became king. He was 26 years old, young for a king, but old enough to have wisdom. His first act showed the kind of ruler he would be: measured, careful, seeking peace and stability. He confirmed his small council, rewarded those who had supported him, and began the work of ruling. He was everything a good king should be. Daemon attended his brother's coronation with a smile on his face and pride in his heart. He stood in his place of honor, dressed in black and red, and watched as the crown was placed on Viserys' head. He told himself he felt no envy. He told himself he was content to serve his brother and the realm. He told himself that being heir was enough. But even then, the hunger gnawed at him. Being close to power was not the same as holding it. Being heir was not the same as being king. And Daemon Targaryen had never been good at accepting second place. The early years of Viserys' reign were peaceful, and Daemon played his part well. He sat on the small council. He advised his brother on matters of war and defence. He trained with the City Watch and made himself visible in King's Landing, walking among the small folk and making them love him. He was the charming prince, the warrior prince, the prince who understood the common man. While Viserys ruled from the throne, Daemon ruled the streets. But service was not glory. Sitting in council chambers was not the same as riding into battle. And Daemon craved more than what his position offered. He needed something that was his, something that would make men speak his name with awe and fear. He needed to be more than just the king's brother. It was during these restless years that Daemon truly bonded with his dragon. Caraxes had been ridden before by Daemon's uncle, Prince Aemon, until Aemon's death. The dragon was fully grown, fierce and battle-tested, with scales the colour of blood and a long serpentine neck that gave him a distinctive look. The small folk called him the Blood Wyrm. They said his scream sounded like a battle cry from the depths of the seven hells. When Daemon first claimed Caraxes, the dragon resisted. Caraxes was no young beast eager for a rider. He was a killer, a creature of fire and fury who had tasted battle and blood. But Daemon did not back down. He climbed onto the dragon's back again and again, no matter how many times Caraxes tried to throw him. He whispered to the beast in High Valyrian, the ancient tongue of their shared heritage. He fed the dragon himself, brought him meat and fish with his own hands. He refused to let anyone else near Caraxes until the dragon accepted him. The day Caraxes finally obeyed, finally rose into the sky with Daemon on his back, was the day Daemon became truly dangerous. A Targaryen with a dragon was a force of nature. A Targaryen with a dragon like Caraxes, a beast of war and blood, was something more. Together they flew over King's Landing, casting their shadow on the streets below. The small folk looked up in wonder and fear, and Daemon smiled. This was power. This was glory. This was his. He flew Caraxes often after that, sometimes with purpose, sometimes simply to feel the wind and see the world spread beneath him. He flew over the Crownlands and out to Dragonstone. He flew along the coast and over the hills. And when he returned to King's Landing, he did so in a roar of wings and fire, announcing his presence to all who would hear. He wanted them to know. He wanted them to remember. Daemon Targaryen was not just the king's brother. He was the rider of the Blood Wyrm, and he would not be ignored. The court watched this transformation with mixed feelings. Some admired Daemon's skill and courage. Others worried about what it meant when the heir to the throne became so fixated on power and glory. Viserys saw his brother's restlessness and tried to give him meaningful work. He appointed Daemon to important positions. He sought his counsel on military matters. He praised him publicly and defended him privately. But nothing seemed enough to satisfy the hunger that drove Daemon forward. And so, as the years passed, the pattern began. Daemon would serve for a time, playing the dutiful brother and loyal heir. Then something would happen, some slight or disappointment or limitation, and the charm would crack. The smile would become a sneer. The helpful advisor would become the bitter critic, and Viserys would be reminded that his brother, for all his gifts, was not an easy man to manage. But in those early years, before the real trouble began, there were still moments of genuine brotherhood. Times when they drank together and laughed at old memories. Times when Daemon stood at Viserys' side and meant it with his whole heart. Times when the love between them mattered more than crowns and thrones and the hunger for glory. Those moments would not last. The rogue prince was emerging, and once he fully appeared, nothing would be simple again. But in the shadow of their youth, in the days when Daemon was still learning what kind of man he would become, the brothers stood together. Second son and king, heir and throne, dragon riders both, bound by blood and history and the weight of the name they shared. Daemon Targaryen had spent his entire life in shadow, but shadows cannot hold dragons forever. The time was coming when he would step into the light, and when he did, all of Westeros would know his name. For better or worse, the rogue prince was rising, and the realm would never be the same. When Viserys first offered Daemon command of the City Watch, it seemed like a perfect solution to a growing problem. The king needed his brother occupied, given purpose, kept busy with something meaningful. Daemon needed an outlet for his restless energy, a position that was his alone, something he could shape and control. The City Watch of King's Landing was a mess, a collection of lazy, corrupt, and ineffective men who took bribes and looked the other way, while thieves and murderers worked freely. It needed a strong hand. It needed someone who was not afraid to break things in order to rebuild them. Daemon Targaryen was exactly that kind of man. He accepted the position with enthusiasm that surprised even those who knew him well. This was not a seat on the small council where he had to share authority. This was not a ceremonial title that meant nothing. This was command, real command. 2,000 men would answer to him and him alone. He could remake them in his own image. He could turn them into something the realm had never seen before. The first thing Daemon did was give them a uniform. Before he took command, the City Watch wore whatever they pleased. Some had mail, some had leather, some had nothing but the rust-eaten swords they carried. They looked like beggars, and they acted like it too. Daemon changed that immediately. He commissioned cloaks for every man, long cloaks dyed the colour of gold, not yellow, not pale, but true gold, deep and rich and impossible to miss. When his men walked the streets of King's Landing, everyone would know who they were. The small folk began calling them the Gold Cloaks almost immediately, and the name stuck. Within weeks, you couldn't walk through King's Landing without seeing them. Golden cloaks swirling in the wind. Golden cloaks standing at corners. Golden cloaks marching through the streets in formation, their boots striking the cobblestones in unison. They became a presence, a force, a symbol of authority that hadn't existed before. But the cloaks were only the beginning. Daemon knew that loyalty could not be bought with cloth alone. He needed his men to follow him, to believe in him, to be willing to die for him if necessary. So he did something no commander of the City Watch had ever done before. He made himself one of them. He did not command from a distance. He walked the streets with his men, wearing his own golden cloak and carrying his sword at his side. He learned their names. He asked about their families. He drank with them in the taverns and shared their meals in the barracks. When they trained, he trained with them, showing them techniques he had learned from the finest swordsmen in the realm. When they patrolled, he patrolled with them, leading from the front, rather than sending orders from behind a desk. The men of the City Watch had never been treated this way before. They were used to commanders who saw them as tools, as expendable bodies to throw at problems. Daemon made them feel like warriors. He made them feel like they mattered. He told them they weren't just keeping the peace. They were protecting the greatest city in Westeros. They were the first line of defense for the throne itself. They were gold cloaks, and that meant something. They loved him for it. Within months, Daemon had transformed the City Watch from a joke into a force of genuine loyalty and pride. His men would have followed him anywhere. They would have done anything he asked. And that was exactly what Daemon wanted. He organized them into proper companies, each with its own commander answering directly to him. He established regular patrols and created a system where information flowed up through the ranks. He knew what was happening in every corner of King's Landing because his gold cloaks were everywhere, watching, listening, reporting back. He turned the City Watch into his own personal intelligence network, and he used it to make himself indispensable to his brother. When Viserys asked about threats to the city, Daemon had answers. When the small council discussed crime and safety, Daemon had solutions. He was effective, efficient, and seemingly dedicated to making King's Landing safer. The king praised him publicly and thanked him privately. For a time, it seemed like Daemon had finally found his place. But there was another side to Daemon's command, a darker side that most of the court did not see until it was too late. The same man who drank with his men and made them feel valued was also capable of unleashing them like hunting dogs on prey. The same prince who could be charming and attentive one moment could become cold and brutal the next. And the gold cloaks, loyal to Daemon above all else, would follow his orders no matter what those orders were. It started with what Daemon called cleaning the city. King's Landing was full of criminals, he said. Thieves and murderers walked the streets without fear. The previous City Watch had been too weak, too corrupt, too afraid to do what was necessary. Daemon would not make that mistake. He would restore order. He would make the streets safe, no matter the cost. The first purge came without warning. One night, when the city was dark and most people were asleep, the gold cloaks swept through Flea Bottom. They kicked down doors and dragged men from their beds. They rounded up anyone who had been accused of theft, murder, or any other serious crime. They did not bother with trials or judges or any of the formal procedures that the law required. Daemon had decided these men were guilty, and that was enough. By morning, the streets were running with blood. Some of the accused were hanged. Others were mutilated, losing hands or feet or ears as punishment for their crimes. A few were simply killed on the spot, cut down when they tried to resist or run. The gold cloaks worked through the night, and when the sun rose over King's Landing, the city woke to a new reality. Daemon Targaryen's justice was swift, brutal, and absolute. The small folk did not know how to feel. On one hand, many of those killed or mutilated had been criminals. The streets did become safer, at least for a time. Thieves thought twice before stealing. Cutthroats looked over their shoulders. The fear of the gold cloaks and the fear of Daemon himself became a real and tangible thing. Crime did go down, which was exactly what Daemon had promised. But on the other hand, the violence was shocking, even for a city used to hardship and cruelty. Not everyone who died that night had been guilty. Some had been falsely accused. Some had committed minor crimes that did not deserve death or mutilation. Some had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time when the gold cloaks came through. And the brutality of the punishments, the public displays of severed hands and broken bodies, turned stomachs even among those who wanted the city cleaned up. Daemon saw no problem with any of it. When questioned by members of the small council, he defended his actions without hesitation. The city was safer, was it not? Crime had decreased, had it not? The small folk could walk the streets without fear, could they not? He had done exactly what he had been tasked to do. If the methods were harsh, well, harsh times required harsh measures. The criminals of King's Landing understood only one language, and that was the language of force. Some on the council agreed with him. Others were horrified, but stayed silent, unwilling to challenge a prince of the blood. And Viserys, caught between wanting to support his brother and feeling deeply uneasy about the violence, chose to look the other way. He told himself that Daemon knew what he was doing. He told himself that the ends justified the means. He told himself that this was simply the price of order. But the purges did not stop. Every few months, sometimes more often, Daemon would decide it was time to clean the city again. The gold cloaks would sweep through the poorer districts, rounding up suspects and dispensing Daemon's justice. Each time, the violence seemed to escalate. Each time, Daemon seemed to take more pleasure in the power he wielded. He was not just keeping the peace. He was demonstrating his authority, showing the city that he could do whatever he wanted, that no one could stop him. The strange thing was that many of the small folk continued to love him. They saw the brutality, yes, but they also saw a prince who walked among them, who remembered their names, who seemed to care about their safety in a way that no other noble ever had. When Daemon appeared in the streets, people cheered. When he bought rounds of drinks at taverns, men sang his praises. When he stopped to speak with merchants or craftsmen, they felt honoured by his attention. Daemon had a gift for making people feel special, for making them believe he was on their side. He could walk through Flea Bottom in the morning, smiling and jesting with the people, and then order the gold cloaks to butcher suspected criminals that same night. The two sides of him existed together, charm and violence, compassion and cruelty, and somehow he made it work. He convinced people that the violence was necessary, that it was for their own good, that he was protecting them from the monsters that lurked in the shadows. It was a dangerous game, but Daemon played it masterfully. He understood that power required both love and fear. You needed people to adore you, but you also needed them to be afraid of what you might do if they crossed you. The gold cloaks were the perfect tool for this balance. They were his loyal followers, his instruments of both protection and terror, and they made him the most powerful man in King's Landing, besides the king himself. The relationship between Daemon and Viserys began to strain under the weight of these actions. The king wanted to believe in his brother, wanted to trust that Daemon was doing what was necessary. But the reports kept coming. More violence, more excess, more questions about whether Daemon was serving the realm or simply satisfying his own hunger for power and control. The small council pressed Viserys to rein his brother in. They spoke carefully, respectfully, but their concern was real. Daemon was becoming too powerful, too independent, too willing to act without consulting the king. The City Watch answered to him alone, not to the crown. His men were more loyal to Daemon than to the throne. If it ever came to a conflict between the king and the prince, whose side would the gold cloaks choose? Viserys heard these warnings, but struggled to act on them. Daemon was his brother, his heir, his blood. They had grown up together. They had mourned their father together. They were supposed to be a team, united in ruling the realm. How could Viserys turn against him now? How could he punish Daemon for being effective, for doing the difficult work that others were too weak to do? But even Viserys could not ignore everything. There were moments when Daemon's actions went too far, when the brutality became impossible to defend, when the king had no choice but to confront his brother. These confrontations were always tense, always painful. Daemon did not take criticism well, especially not from Viserys. He would listen with cold eyes and a tight jaw, barely containing his anger. He would defend himself with words that cut like knives, reminding Viserys that someone had to do the dirty work, that someone had to be willing to make the hard choices while the king sat on his comfortable throne. These arguments never ended well. Sometimes Daemon would storm out, leaving Viserys alone with his doubts. Sometimes they would reach an uneasy peace, agreeing to disagree, promising to do better. But nothing really changed. Daemon continued to command the City Watch his way, and Viserys continued to let him, because he did not know how to stop his brother without breaking their bond completely. The pattern was set. Daemon would push boundaries, testing how far he could go. Viserys would tolerate it until it became intolerable, then push back weakly. Daemon would pull back just enough to appease his brother, then push again when the moment was right. It was a dance they would perform for years, a cycle of transgression and forgiveness that slowly poisoned their relationship. But in those early years, when Daemon first commanded the Gold Cloaks, the full consequences were not yet clear. The city was safer, at least by some measures. The City Watch was effective and loyal. And Daemon had found something that was truly his, something he could control and shape and use to build his own power base. He was no longer just the king's brother. He was the commander of the City Watch. He was the man the small folk cheer for in the streets. He was the prince with 2,000 men who would die for him. He was dangerous. And he was just getting started. The nights when Daemon led his gold cloaks through the streets of King's Landing became legendary. The small folk would hear the sound of boots on cobblestones, the metallic clank of armor, the rustle of golden cloaks in the wind. They would peer through shuttered windows and see torches burning, see Daemon at the head of his men with his hand on his sword, see the determination in his eyes. And they would know that someone's night was about to end in blood. This was Daemon Targaryen at his most powerful and most frightening. Charming by day, brutal by night, loved and feared in equal measure. A prince who could make you feel like the most important person in the world one moment and order your death the next if you crossed him. The gold cloaks were his instrument, his weapon, his proof that he mattered, and he wielded them with a skill that terrified even those who supported him. The City Watch would never be the same. Daemon had transformed it into something new, something that belonged to him rather than to the throne. And in doing so, he had taken his first real step toward becoming the rogue prince, The man who would shape history with his charisma and his chaos, his charm and his cruelty. The man who would be remembered for centuries, not because he was good or wise, but because he was impossible to ignore. The Stepstones had been a problem for Westeros for generations. These rocky islands stretched between Dawn and the Free Cities like broken teeth jutting from the sea. They were not valuable in themselves, just bare stone and scrub grass, and beaches fit for nothing but shipwrecks. But they sat astride the shipping lanes, and whoever controlled them could prey on merchant vessels travelling between Westeros and Essos. For years, pirates had used the Stepstones as their base, raiding and plundering and making the narrow sea dangerous for honest trade. Then the Triarchy came. The Three Daughters, as they were called, were an alliance of 3 free cities, Myr, Lys, and Tyrosh. They banded together and sent their fleets to clear out the pirates, claiming they wanted to make the sea safe for commerce. But once they held the Stepstones, they did not leave. Instead, they declared themselves the rightful rulers of the islands and began demanding tolls from every ship that passed through. The tolls were heavy, and those who refused to pay found their ships burned and their crews drowned. Westeros could not allow this to stand. The Triarchy's control of the Stepstones was choking trade and costing the realm gold with every passing month. The small council debated what to do. Some wanted to send the royal fleet, others wanted to negotiate. Still, others suggested ignoring the problem and finding alternate shipping routes. The debates dragged on for months, while the Triarchy grew stronger and bolder. Daemon Targaryen didn't wait for the small council to reach a decision. He saw an opportunity, and he took it. Here was a war, a real war, one that needed fighting. Here was a chance to win glory and prove his worth as a warrior and commander. Here was a chance to escape the politics of King's Landing and do what he had been born to do. Lead men into battle with fire and blood. He went to Viserys and asked for permission to take force to the Stepstones. The king hesitated. Sending his brother and heir into a war zone was risky. If something happened to Daemon, the succession would be thrown into chaos again. But Viserys also knew that Daemon needed this. His brother was growing more restless and unpredictable with each passing month. Perhaps a war would satisfy his hunger for glory. Perhaps it would give him the purpose he so desperately sought. Viserys gave his blessing, but he did not offer much support. No royal fleet, no army from the crown. If Daemon wanted this war, he would have to fight it, with whatever forces he could gather on his own. It was a test, though neither brother said so aloud. Could Daemon succeed without the full backing of the throne? Could he prove he was more than just the king's brother, Daemon? Accepted the challenge without complaint. He went to Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, the richest man in the 7 kingdoms and master of the largest fleet in Westeros. Corlys had his own reasons to hate the Triarchy. Their control of the Stepstones was costing him fortunes in lost trade. His ships were being stopped and taxed and sometimes seized. He wanted the Triarchy broken as much as Daemon did. The 2 men made a pact. Corlys would provide ships, gold, and men. Daemon would provide leadership, and Caraxes. Together, they would take the Stepstones and drive the Triarchy back to their cities. It was a partnership born of mutual need rather than friendship, but it would prove to be one of the most effective military alliances of the age. They sailed for the Stepstones in 106 AC, 3 years into Viserys' reign. Daemon took with him some of his gold cloaks, men who had proven their loyalty and courage in the streets of King's Landing. Corlys brought his fleet and soldiers from Driftmark. They also recruited sellswords and adventurers from across the narrow sea, men looking for glory and gold and the chance to fight under a Targaryen prince. By the time they reached the Stepstones, Daemon commanded a force of several thousand men and dozens of ships. The Triarchy was waiting for them. They had fortified the islands, built watchtowers and small keeps, stationed troops at strategic points. They had their own fleets and their own dragons, though none as fearsome as Caraxes. They believed the islands were theirs by right of conquest, and they would not give them up without a fight. The war that followed would last for years, a grinding, brutal campaign of island hopping and naval battles. But in those first months, Daemon showed what kind of commander he truly was. He did not lead from the rear. He did not send his men to die while he stayed safe on a ship. He led from the front, always, throwing himself into every battle with a recklessness that terrified his allies and awed his enemies. When they stormed the first island, Daemon was the first man off the boat, sword in hand, screaming a battle cry that sent chills down the spines of those who heard it. He fought like a demon, cutting through the Triarchy's soldiers with skill and fury. His men followed him because they had no choice. How could they hang back when their prince was charging forward? How could they show fear when he showed none? After they took that first island, Daemon walked among his soldiers, bloodied and exhausted, but grinning like a madman. He clapped men on the shoulders and praised their courage. He shared the meagre rations and refused special treatment. He made them feel like they had achieved something great together, like they were brothers in arms rather than prince and common soldiers. The loyalty he had built in King's Landing, he built again here, but stronger, forged in blood and fire. When battles couldn't be won with swords alone, Daemon brought Caraxes. The Blood Wyrm was a terror from the skies, burning ships and soldiers alike. Daemon would fly over enemy positions, raining fire down on them, then land and dismount to fight alongside his men on the ground. It was unnecessary. A dragon rider did not need to risk himself in ground combat. But Daemon did it anyway, because he wanted his men to see him, to know that he shared their danger, to understand that he was not just some distant commander, but warrior who bled and killed beside them. The Triarchy learned to fear him. They called him the Prince of the Narrow Sea. They said he was more demon than man, that he couldn't be killed, that his dragon was born from the fires of hell itself. These were exaggerations, of course, but they were based in truth. Daemon was relentless. He never seemed to tire. He never seemed to doubt. He attacked when others would have retreated. He took risks that should have killed him, but somehow never did. The campaign had its victories and its defeats. Some islands fell quickly, others took weeks or months of bloody fighting. The Triarchy reinforced their positions and sent more ships and more men. This was not a quick war. This was not a glorious adventure that would be over in a season. This was a grinding, exhausting struggle, where every gain came at a terrible cost. But Daemon thrived in it. War suited him in a way that peace never could. Here his recklessness was an asset rather than a liability. Here his hunger for glory drove his men forward instead of making them nervous. Here, he could be the hero he had always wanted to be, the warrior prince who won impossible victories and made men sing his praises. The story spread across Westeros. Daemon Targaryen was fighting the Triarchy in the Stepstones. Daemon Targaryen had taken 3 islands in a single month. Daemon Targaryen had burned an entire enemy fleet with Caraxes. The bards began composing songs about him. The small folk spoke his name with admiration. Even those who had criticized him in King's Landing found themselves impressed by his courage and success. But as the war dragged on, Daemon began to want more than just military victory. He began to want recognition, titles, the formal acknowledgement that what he was doing mattered. He had left King's Landing as the king's brother and commander of the City Watch. He wanted to return as something greater. He wanted to return as a king in his own right. It was a dangerous desire, and it led to one of the most controversial decisions of the entire campaign. After a particularly impressive string of victories, after taking the largest and most important of the Stepstones, Daemon declared himself King of the Narrow Sea, and the Stepstones. He had a crown made, a simple circlet of driftwood and shells, and whatever materials could be found on the barren islands. It was not a grand crown, not something made of gold and jewels, but it was a crown nonetheless. His men crowned him in a ceremony on the beach, shouting his name and raising their swords in salute. Corlys Velaryon was there, and though he must have had doubts, he did not object. The sellswords and adventurers cheered, because they followed strength, and Daemon had proven his strength beyond question. For a moment on that rocky beach with the waves crashing behind him, Daemon was a king. But he was not content to be king of a handful of worthless islands far from Westeros. He wanted Viserys to acknowledge his new title. He wanted the realm to recognize what he had achieved. So he sailed back to King's Landing, leaving Corlys to hold the Stepstones, and presented himself to his brother. The reunion did not go as Daemon hoped. He walked into the throne room wearing his driftwood crown, expecting praise and recognition. What he got instead was silence and tension. Viserys sat on the Iron Throne, looking at his brother with an expression that was hard to read. The small council stood to the side, clearly uncomfortable. No one knew what to say. Daemon has declared himself a king without Viserys' permission. He had crowned himself, as if the authority to make kings came from military success, rather than from the rightful ruler of Westeros. It was a challenge to Viserys' authority, whether Daemon intended it that way or not. There could not be 2 Targaryen kings. There could not be a king who answered to no one, who had made himself royal by his own will. The confrontation that followed became the stuff of legend. Daemon approached the throne, still wearing his crown, still expecting his brother to be proud of him. Viserys did not smile. He did not congratulate Daemon on his victories. Instead, he asked a simple question. What did Daemon think he was doing, crowning himself without the king's leave? Daemon defended himself. He had won the Stepstones. He had defeated the Triarchy where others had merely talked about it. He had risked his life and led men into battle, and achieved what the crown itself had not bothered to attempt. Did that not deserve recognition? Did that not earn him the right to call himself king of what he had conquered? Viserys disagreed. The Stepstones were not demons to rule. They were not a new kingdom to be carved out and claimed. They were a military objective, a problem that needed solving, and Daemon had been sent to solve it, not to make himself a king. By crowning himself, Daemon had overstepped. He had acted as if he was independent of the throne, as if he could create his own authority separate from his brother's. The argument grew heated. Daemon's pride was wounded. He had expected gratitude and received criticism instead. He had expected to be celebrated and found himself being scolded like a child. All the resentment that had been building for years, all the frustration of being second, all the anger at never being quite enough, rose to the surface. What happened next became one of the most talked about moments in both their lives. Daemon reached up, took the driftwood crown from his head, and threw it at Viserys' feet. He did not place it down gently. He did not offer it respectfully. He hurled it like trash, like something worthless, and it clattered on the stone floor of the throne room in front of everyone. The gesture said everything words could not. If Viserys would not recognize Daemon's achievements, then Daemon wanted nothing from him. If being king of the Stepstones meant nothing to his brother, then let the crown lie in the dirt. Daemon had offered his loyalty and his service and his blood, and in return he received only more reminders that he would always be second, always be lesser, always be the spare. He turned and walked out of the throne room without another word. The small council stood in shocked silence. Viserys sat on the iron throne, looking at the discarded crown, feeling the weight of what had just happened. The bond between the brothers had cracked, not broken entirely, but damaged in a way that would be hard to repair. Daemon returned to the Stepstones, but the fire had gone out of the campaign. He fought on because there was nothing else to do, because giving up would mean admitting defeat. But the joy was gone. The sense of purpose had soured. He had won victories that should have made him legendary, and instead he felt more frustrated than ever. He was still second, still the spare, still not enough. The war in the Stepstones would continue for years, grinding on until finally the Triarchy sued for peace and withdrew. Daemon would claim victory, and in truth he had won. The sea lanes were opened, the islands were secured. He had achieved what he set out to do. But the crown he had wanted, the recognition he craved, never came. Viserys did not make him king of the narrow sea. The realm did not sing his praises the way he had hoped. What the campaign did accomplish was proving Daemon's skill as a warrior and commander. He had led men in battle and won. He had shown courage and tactical brilliance. He had earned the fierce loyalty of those who fought beside him. These were not small things, but for Daemon they were not enough. They would never be enough, because what he wanted was not just to be respected or admired. He wanted to be first, and that was the one thing his brother could never give him. The Stepstones campaign defined Daemon in the eyes of the realm. He was no longer just the charming prince who commanded the city watch. He was a proven warrior, a dragon rider who had gone to war and won. He was dangerous and capable and willing to take risks that terrified more cautious men. He was the rogue prince, and his legend was growing with each passing year. But the campaign also deepened the rift between him and Viserys. The throne crown became a symbol of everything wrong between them. Daemon's hunger for recognition and power. Viserys' inability to give his brother what he needed without undermining his own authority. The love that still existed between them strained nearly to breaking by pride and duty and the complicated dynamics of being brothers when one wore a crown and the other never would. The war was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Daemon would return to King's Landing changed, harder, more bitter, and the stage was set for the conflicts that would define the rest of his life. Conflicts where charm and chaos walked hand in hand, where the rogue prince would prove himself capable of both inspiring devotion and spreading destruction in equal measure. Daemon returned to King's Landing from the Stepstones, a different man than when he had left. The years of war had hardened him, sharpened edges that were already dangerous. He had proven himself as a warrior and commander, but the recognition he craved had been denied. The memory of that driftwood crown lying discarded on the throne room floor haunted him. He had offered his brother glory and received only criticism in return. The resentment that had always lived in his chest now burned hotter than ever. Viserys tried to welcome him back, tried to heal the wounds between them. He praised Daemon's victories in public and thanked him for his service to the realm. He restored him to the small council and gave him back command of the city watch. He spoke of brotherhood and family and how proud he was of what Daemon had accomplished. But words were not enough. They had never been enough. Daemon heard the praise and felt only the absence of what he truly wanted, to be seen as an equal, to matter as much as his brother, to be first instead of forever second. The court noticed the change in him. Before the war, Daemon had been charming and unpredictable, capable of great warmth one moment and cold anger the next. Now the warmth came less often. Now the anger simmered closer to the surface. He attended council meetings, but said little. He commanded the gold cloaks, but took less joy in it. He walked through King's Landing, and the small folk still cheered, but his smiles seemed forced, his attention elsewhere. Viserys had his own troubles. His wife, Queen Aemma Arryn, had given him a daughter, but no son. The girl, Rhaenyra, was bright and spirited and beloved by her father, but she was not a boy. The realm expected a male heir. The small council expected a male heir. Viserys himself, though he loved his daughter, knew that without a son his succession would be questioned. So Aemma became pregnant again, and again, and again. Each pregnancy ended in tragedy. Stillbirths and miscarriages, babies who lived only days. The Queen's health began to fail under the strain of so many failed pregnancies. Daemon watched this cycle with mixed feelings. He loved his niece Rhaenyra. The girl was fearless and clever, everything a Targaryen should be. He spent time with her when he could, teaching her about dragons and telling her stories of the Stepstones. She looked up to him, admired him in a way that reminded him of better times. With Rhaenyra, he could be the hero uncle, the daring warrior, Prince, the man he wanted to be, rather than the bitter spare he had become. But every pregnancy of Queen Aemma's was also a reminder of Daemon's position. If Viserys had a son, Daemon would no longer be heir. He would be pushed further from the throne, made even less important than he already was. Part of him hoped for his brother's happiness, hoped that Aemma would finally give Viserys the son he needed. But another part, the darker part, that Daemon tried not to acknowledge, even to himself, hoped that it would never happen. That part whispered that as long as Viserys had no son, Daemon still mattered. He was still heir. He was still one step from the throne. It was a poisonous thought, one that shamed him when he allowed himself to think it clearly. But it lived in him nonetheless, growing stronger with each year that passed, without a male heir. Daemon had never wanted to be king through his brother's tragedy, but he had also never stopped wanting to be king. The tension between them grew worse when Viserys remarried after Aemma's death, during a difficult childbirth that took both mother and child. The king chose Alicent Hightower, daughter of his hand, Otto Hightower. She was young, barely older than Rhaenyra, and beautiful in the way that green girls often are. The marriage was politically sensible. The Hightowers were powerful and loyal. Alicent was proven fertile. Having already borne children in previous matches would come later, but she was young and healthy. But the marriage felt like a betrayal to many, including Daemon. Viserys had not consulted him. He had not asked Daemon's opinion or sought his counsel. He had simply announced the decision as if Daemon's feelings did not matter, as if the heir to the throne had no say in who might become queen and possibly mother to future heirs. It was another reminder that Daemon was not truly a partner in ruling the realm. He was an accessory, useful when needed, but ultimately dispensable. Daemon's relationship with the new queen was cold from the start. Alicent was everything he was not: careful, pious, respectful of tradition and propriety. She disapproved of Daemon's reputation, his wildness, his influence over Rhaenyra. She saw him as a threat to her own children's future positions, and she had the ear of both her father and her husband, which made her more dangerous than she appeared. Otto Hightower had never liked Daemon. The Hand saw him clearly for what he was: ambitious, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous to the realm's stability. Otto had been whispering warnings about Daemon to Viserys for years, and now, with his daughter as queen, his influence grew even stronger. He pushed Viserys to distance himself from Daemon, to limit his power, to prepare for the day when the king would have sons of his own, and Daemon would no longer be heir. The small council became a battlefield of subtle conflicts. Otto would question Daemon's decisions regarding the city watch. Daemon would challenge Otto's counsel on other matters. Viserys sat between them, trying to keep peace, but his patience was wearing thin. He wanted his brother and his Hand to work together. Instead, they circled each other like wolves, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. Then came the pregnancy that changed everything. Queen Alicent announced she was with child. The realm celebrated. Viserys was overjoyed. If the child was a boy, the succession would be secured. The king would finally have the male heir he needed, and Daemon would be displaced, pushed aside, made irrelevant in the line of succession. Daemon took the news with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He congratulated his brother publicly and said all the right things. Privately, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. Everything he had been, everything he had worked for, the position that had defined his entire adult life, was about to be taken away. Not through any fault of his own, not because he had failed or betrayed anyone, simply because his brother's young wife was capable of bearing sons when Queen Aemma had not been. The pregnancy progressed, and the court held its breath. Viserys was attentive to his wife, protective and hopeful in a way he had not been for years. Rhaenyra watched her father dote on his new wife and felt her own position becoming uncertain. If Alicent bore a son, would Rhaenyra still be loved? Would she still matter? These were the questions that ate at both niece and uncle, binding them closer together in their shared anxiety. Then tragedy struck. The labour was difficult, far more difficult than anyone had expected. The masters worked through the night, while Viserys paced outside the birthing chamber. The queen screamed, and the sound echoed through the Red Keep like the cries of a wounded animal. Something was wrong. Everyone knew it, though no one wanted to say it aloud. The child was born just before dawn, a boy, as Viserys had prayed for, but he lived only a few hours before the breath left his tiny body. Queen Alicent survived the birth, but fell into a fever that the masters could not break. For days she lingered between life and death, while Viserys sat at her bedside, hollow-eyed and broken. The son he had wanted so desperately was dead. The wife he had chosen lay dying. And the realm watched and whispered and wondered what would come next. It was during this time, while the king grieved and the court held its breath, that Daemon made the mistake that would define his relationship with his brother for years to come. He was drinking in a tavern with some of his gold cloaks and other companions, trying to drown his own complicated feelings about the tragedy. The wine flowed freely, and tongues loosened as they always did when men drank together late into the night. Someone raised a toast to the dead prince, the boy who would have been king. Others joined in, solemn and respectful. Then Daemon, drunk and bitter, and feeling the weight of everything that had happened, raised his own cup and spoke words that would haunt him forever. He called himself the heir for a day. He said it with a laugh, with irony, with all the dark humour of a man who had been displaced and then restored through tragedy. For one day, the boy had been heir. Now Daemon was heir again. Heir for a day, then heir again. It was absurd. It was tragic. It was funny in the way that terrible things sometimes are when you're drunk and angry and tired of pretending to feel things you do not feel. But someone heard. Someone always hears. The words were repeated, passed from person to person, twisted slightly in each retelling. By the time they reached Otto Hightower, they had become something worse than what Daemon had intended. They sounded like celebration. They sounded like Daemon was glad the boy had died, glad that he was heir again, glad that his brother's tragedy had restored his position. Otto brought the words to Viserys immediately. The king was still sitting vigil at his wife's bedside, still raw with grief and exhaustion. When he heard what Daemon had supposedly said, something broke inside him. All the years of defending his brother, all the times he had made excuses for Daemon's behaviour, all the patience he had shown in the face of constant challenges to his authority, it all shattered in that moment. Viserys summoned Daemon to the Red Keep. The confrontation was private, just the two brothers. But the servants who stood outside the door later spoke of raised voices and words that cut like knives. Viserys accused Daemon of celebrating his son's death. Daemon denied it, tried to explain that the words had been taken out of context, that he had been drunk and stupid, but not cruel. But Viserys was beyond listening. His son was dead. His wife might die. And his brother, the man who should have been supporting him, had instead made a joke of the whole tragedy. The king did something he had never done before. He banished Daemon from King's Landing. Not forever, not formally, but the message was clear. Leave the city. Go to Dragonstone or the Stepstones or anywhere else. But do not remain here. Do not show your face at court. Do not come near me or my family until I summon you back." Daemon left without argument. What could he say? The damage was done. The words could not be taken back. His brother hated him now, truly hated him in a way that went beyond frustration or disappointment. This was not something that could be smoothed over with time or apologies. This was a wound that would leave a scar. He went to Dragonstone, the ancient Targaryen seat, and brooded there with only Caraxes for company. The castle was dark and empty, built of black stone and filled with dragon statues that seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. He walked the halls alone and thought about how everything had gone wrong. He had never wanted the boy to die. He had never celebrated the tragedy. But he had also felt relief, and that relief had leaked into words that should never have been spoken. Now he was paying the price. Queen Alicent survived her fever, though she would never be quite the same afterward. The brush with death had changed her, made her more devout, more careful, more afraid. She would bear Viserys other children in time, sons and daughters, who would complicate the succession in ways no one could foresee. But that first son, the one who died after only a day, remained a ghost between Daemon and his brother. Months passed before Viserys summoned Daemon back to King's Landing. When he finally returned, things were different. The easy brotherhood they had once shared was gone. In its place was something more fragile, more formal, more careful. They could still work together. They could still be family. But the trust had been broken, and trust once lost was almost impossible to fully restore. Daemon resumed his position on the small council and his command of the city watch. He attended court functions and played his role, but everyone noticed the distance between him and the king. Where once Daemon had been able to jest with Viserys and speak freely, now he measured his words carefully. Where once he had been welcomed in the king's private chambers, now he waited to be summoned like any other lord. The intimacy was gone, replaced by duty and obligation. The incident became known throughout the realm as the heir for a day affair. Bards sang songs about it, though they were careful not to sing them where Daemon might hear. The small folk gossiped about it in taverns and market squares. The lords and ladies of the court whispered about it behind closed doors. It became part of Daemon's legend, another story that proved he was dangerous, unpredictable, capable of shocking cruelty even toward his own family. Whether that reputation was fair did not matter. Daemon had learned a hard lesson about the power of words and the danger of letting his guard down even for a moment. He had learned that there were people like Otto Hightower who were always watching, always listening, always ready to use any mistake against him. And he had learned that his brother's love, while real, had limits that could be reached and crossed. The charm that had always been Daemon's greatest weapon became more calculated after that. He still smiled and jested and made people love him. But now there was always a part of him held back, watching, making sure he did not slip again. The spontaneity that had made him so compelling became tempered with caution. He was still the rogue prince, still dangerous and magnetic, but now he was also guarded in a way he hadn't been before. His relationship with Rhaenyra deepened during this time. She was the one person at court who still looked at him with unconditional admiration. She did not care about his reputation or the whispers or the mistakes he had made. To her, he was still Uncle Daemon, the dragon rider who told her stories and treated her like she mattered. He found comfort in that simple acceptance, and she found in him an ally who understood what it felt like to be pushed aside by the shifting politics of succession. But even that relationship, innocent as it was, would eventually become complicated and controversial. Nothing involving Daemon Targaryen stayed simple for long. He carried chaos with him like a second skin, and even his best intentions had a way of creating problems. The Heir for a Day incident was just one more example of how Daemon's life seemed destined to be a series of moments where charm and destruction walked hand in hand, where love and resentment existed in the same space, where he could be both the hero and the villain, depending on who was telling the story. The years that followed would only deepen these patterns. Daemon would continue to serve his brother, but the service would always be tinged with bitterness. He would continue to seek glory and recognition, but nothing he achieved would ever feel like enough. He would continue to be loved by the small folk and feared by his enemies, admired for his courage and condemned for his cruelty. He was the rogue prince, and that title was both his crown and his curse. Daemon Targaryen's first marriage was not a choice, but a duty, and from the first day it felt like a cage. Her name was Rhea Royce, Lady of Runestone, heir to one of the oldest and most powerful houses in the Vale. She was a few years older than Daemon, strong and capable, skilled in the hunt, and comfortable in armor. She was called the Bronze Beauty, by some, though not by her husband. Daemon had his own name for her, one he used behind her back and sometimes to her face when he was feeling particularly cruel. He called her his bronze bitch. The marriage had been arranged when Daemon was young, before he had proven himself as a warrior, before he had commanded the city watch, before he had fought in the Stepstones. It was meant to bind House Targaryen to the Vale, to secure alliances and strengthen the realm. No one had asked Daemon if he wanted to marry Rhea Royce. No one had cared whether they suited each other or whether there was any affection between them. It was a political match, nothing more, and Daemon resented it from the beginning. He spent as little time with his wife as possible. After the wedding, he returned to King's Landing and left her at Runestone. He claimed his duties required him in the capital, and in truth, they did. But even when he had time to visit the Vale, he did not go. He sent letters occasionally, brief and formal, fulfilling the minimum requirements of a husband. Rhea remained at Runestone, managing her lands and living her life as if she had no husband at all. The court gossiped about the estranged marriage. Some pitied Rhea, abandoned by a prince who cared nothing for her. Others pitied Daemon trapped in a loveless match with a woman who could not give him the glamour and excitement he craved. The truth was that both were trapped, bound by vows neither had truly wanted, prisoners of duty and politics. Years passed this way, with Daemon and Rhea living separate lives connected only by name and law. Then, in 115 AC, something happened that would stain Daemon's reputation forever. Lady Rhea Royce died. The circumstances were suspicious, to say the least. She was thrown from her horse while hunting, they said. The fall broke her neck and killed her within days. It was an accident, a tragic mishap that could happen to any rider, but the timing was too convenient. Daemon had been seen in the Vale shortly before her death, though he claimed he was there on other business, and had not visited Runestone. whispers began immediately. Some said Daemon had arranged the accident. Others said he had done it himself, either through poison or sabotage or some other means. The Royces suspected foul play, but could prove nothing. Daemon denied any involvement, and without evidence, no accusations could be made openly. Whether Daemon killed his wife or simply benefited from a fortunate accident, no one could say for certain, but the suspicion followed him for the rest of his life. Even those who admired him, even those who loved him, wondered in private whether the rogue prince had murdered his bronze bitch to free himself from an unwanted marriage. It was the kind of thing people could believe about Daemon Targaryen. He was capable of violence. He was capable of ruthlessness. And he had never hidden his contempt for the wife he had been forced to take. With Rhea dead, Daemon was free to marry again. But freedom brought its own complications. He was 40 years old, no longer young, but still vital and dangerous. His reputation was both an asset and a burden. Some families would have been honoured to wed their daughters to a Targaryen prince. Others wanted nothing to do with a man who might have killed his first wife and who carried scandal like a second cloak. It was during this time that Daemon's relationship with his niece Rhaenyra became the subject of intense speculation and gossip. She was 16, beautiful and headstrong, with her father's silver hair and her own fierce spirit. Daemon had always been close to her, had always treated her with an affection and attention that others in the court did not show. After his return from exile following the Heir for a Day incident, that closeness had deepened. They were seen together often. Daemon took her flying on Caraxes. He gave her gifts and told her stories of his adventures. He taught her about dragons and war and the history of their house. To anyone watching, it looked like a doting uncle and his beloved niece. But some saw something else. They saw the way Daemon looked at Rhaenyra. They saw the way she blushed when he spoke to her. They wondered if the relationship was as innocent as it appeared. The truth was complicated, as truth often is with Daemon. He did love Rhaenyra, but the nature of that love was difficult to define even for himself. She reminded him of better times, of when he'd been young and full of hope, rather than bitter and disappointed. She admired him without reservation, saw him as a hero, rather than a problem to be managed. In her eyes, he was still great. And Daemon, hungry for recognition and respect, fed on that admiration like a dragon feeds on sheep. Whether his feelings ever crossed into something inappropriate, whether he ever acted on any desires he might have felt, became the subject of endless speculation. Otto Hightower certainly believed the worst. He watched Daemon and Rhaenyra together and saw a threat to his own grandchildren's future. If Daemon married Rhaenyra, he would be consort to the heir, positioned to rule through her. Otto could not allow that. He began dropping careful suggestions to Viserys, pointing out how much time Daemon spent with the princess, how inappropriate it was for an uncle to be so familiar with his niece. Viserys dismissed these concerns at first. He trusted his brother, and he loved his daughter. He did not want to believe that anything untoward was happening between them. But the seeds of doubt were planted, and they would grow in time, watered by further incidents and Daemon's own poor judgment. Before things could come to a crisis with Rhaenyra, Daemon's attention was drawn elsewhere. He met Laena Velaryon, daughter of Corlys Velaryon and Rhaenys Targaryen. Laena was everything Rhea had not been, beautiful, dragonborn, adventurous. She was 12 years younger than Daemon, but that meant little in Westeros, where such age differences were common. What mattered was that she was Targaryen by blood through her mother, that she rode the great she-dragon Vhagar, and that she seemed to genuinely enjoy Daemon's company. Their courtship was swift by some standards, measured by others. Daemon visited Driftmark often, spending time with Corlys and his family. He flew with Laena, the two of them racing across the sky on their dragons. Caraxes and Vhagar made an impressive pair, the Blood Wyrm and the ancient she-dragon, who had once carried Visenya Targaryen herself. When Daemon and Laena were together, they seemed well matched in a way that he and Rhea had never been. Corlys approved of the match. An alliance with Daemon strengthened House Velaryon's connection to the throne. Laena herself seemed happy, perhaps even excited. She had grown up hearing stories of Daemon's exploits in the Stepstones, where her father had fought beside him. She knew his reputation, both the good and the bad, and she chose him anyway. Whether it was love or ambition, or simply the desire for adventure that drew her to him, she became his wife in 115 AC, the same year Rhea died. The wedding was grand, held at Driftmark with half the realm in attendance. Viserys came, and Rhaenyra, and all the great lords and ladies who wanted to be seen at such an important ceremony. Daemon smiled throughout the day, playing the role of devoted bridegroom, and perhaps he was devoted in his way. Laena offered him something he had never had before, a wife who was his equal in blood and daring, who could fly beside him rather than waiting on the ground. The early years of their marriage were the happiest Daemon had known. They spent much of their time away from King's Landing, travelling between Driftmark and Dragonstone, and sometimes venturing across the narrow sea to Pentos and the other free cities. Laena loved to fly, and Daemon was always ready to take to the skies. They would soar together over the water, racing and diving, and simply enjoying the freedom that only dragon riders could know. Laena gave him 2 daughters, Baela and Rhaena, born a year apart. Daemon had never been a father before, and he discovered he had some talent for it. He doted on his girls, taught them High Valyrian, told them stories of their Targaryen heritage. With them, he could be gentle in a way he rarely was with others. They brought out a softer side of him, a side that many people did not know existed beneath the reputation and the violence. For a time, it seemed like Daemon had found peace. He had a wife he respected, daughters he loved, and the freedom to live as he chose without the constant friction of King's Landing politics. He and Viserys exchanged letters, maintaining their relationship at a distance. The wounds from the heir for a day incident began to heal, if not completely, then at least enough that they could speak to each other without anger. But peace could not hold Daemon forever. He was not built for quiet contentment. After a few years of domestic happiness, the restlessness began to return. He started talking about returning to Westeros, about reclaiming his place at court, about ensuring his daughters had their proper positions in the realm. Laena understood, or tried to. She had married the rogue prince knowing what he was. But there was sadness in her eyes when he spoke of leaving their life of freedom behind. Then tragedy struck again, as it so often did in Daemon's life. Laena became pregnant for a 3rd time. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. She was often sick, often weak in ways she had never been before. The maesters worried, but could do little. Childbirth was dangerous for any woman, and this one felt cursed from the beginning. They were at Driftmark when her labour began. It was too early, the baby not ready to be born. Laena laboured for days, screaming in pain as the child refused to come. The Meisters tried everything they knew, but nothing worked. The baby was stuck, killing her slowly, and there was nothing anyone could do. Daemon sat outside her chambers, listening to her screams, feeling helpless in a way he had never felt in battle. He could face armies and dragons, but he couldn't save his wife from the dangers of childbirth. He paced and cursed and prayed to gods he did not truly believe in, begging for mercy that would not come. On the third day, Laena made a choice. She knew she was dying. She knew the baby would not survive. But she was still a dragon rider, and she would choose her own death rather than let it choose her. She gathered what strength she had left and stumbled from her birthing bed. The servants tried to stop her, but she pushed past them with a determination born of desperation and pride. Daemon found her outside, walking toward where Volgar waited. He ran to her, tried to help her, tried to understand what she was doing. She looked at him with eyes that were already halfway gone, already seeing beyond this world. She spoke in High Valyrian, the words of their people, and asked him to let her go. She would die a dragon rider's death, not bleeding in a bed like a common woman. He let her go. What else could he do? She stumbled toward Vargar, and the great she-dragon lowered her head, understanding in that mysterious way that dragons sometimes do. Laena spoke the command, the single word that every dragon knows, Dracarys. Fire Vega hesitated, just for a moment. Then she obeyed. The flames consumed Laena Velaryon in seconds, burning away the pain and the dying baby and everything else. It was a dragon rider's death, fierce and final and chosen. Daemon watched it happen, standing close enough to feel the heat on his face, and something inside him broke that would never be whole again. The grief hit him harder than he expected. He had loved Laena, truly loved her in a way that he had not loved Rhea and would not love the same way again. She had been his partner in adventure, his equal in courage, the mother of his daughters. And now she was ash and smoke and memory. He stood on the beach at Driftmark and stared at the spot where she had died, and for once the mask of charm and confidence slipped completely away. He was just a man who had lost too much, who carried too many scars, who did not know how to grieve properly because he had never learned. The funeral was held days later. Viserys came from King's Landing with his family. Rhaenyra was there, now a young woman, married to Laenor Velaryon in a political match that pleased no one. She and Daemon found each other at the funeral, drawn together by shared grief and old affection. They spoke quietly, away from the others, and something passed between them that observers noted, but could not quite define. In the weeks after Laena's death, Daemon stayed at Driftmark with his daughters. He tried to comfort them, tried to be strong for them, but his own pain made it difficult. He drank more than he should have, and spent long hours staring at the sea. He flew Caraxes alone, racing across the sky, as if he could outrun his grief. He could not. It was during this dark time that his relationship with Rhaenyra changed from whatever it had been into something new and dangerous. She visited him at Driftmark, ostensibly to offer condolences and support. They spent time together, talking about loss and duty, and the burdens of being Targaryen. They flew together on their dragons. And somewhere in that time of grief and vulnerability, they became more than uncle and niece, more than friends, more than whatever innocent relationship they had maintained before. The exact nature of what happened between them would be debated for generations. Some said they became lovers at Driftmark, that grief and desire overcame propriety. Others said nothing physical happened, but that an understanding was reached, a decision made that would shape both their futures. What is certain is that when Daemon left Driftmark, he and Rhaenyra had formed a bond that would scandalize the realm and change the course of history. Within months, Rhaenyra's husband Laenor died under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered of murder. The timing was convenient for Daemon and Rhaenyra, suspiciously so. And then, before the realm could fully process Laena's death, Daemon and Rhaenyra married in a secret ceremony conducted in the tradition of Old Valyria. They wed as Targaryens had once wed before the faith of the Seven forbade such unions, binding themselves to each other with blood and fire. The marriage shocked everyone. Viserys was furious that his daughter had wed without his permission, and to Daemon of all people. The faith condemned the union as inappropriate and possibly incestuous. Though Targaryen marriages between uncle and niece were not technically forbidden, the court was scandalized. Otto Hightower was vindicated in all his warnings about Daemon. And Queen Alicent, who had given Viserys 3 children by then, saw the marriage as a direct threat to her own son's claims to the throne. But Daemon and Rhaenyra did not care what others thought. They were Targaryens, and Targaryens made their own rules. Whether their marriage was born of love or ambition, or some combination of both, it was real and binding. Daemon was now wed to the heir to the Iron Throne. If Viserys died and Rhaenyra became queen, Daemon would be prince consort, standing at the centre of power. At last, he had lost 2 wives, one through death, that may have been murder, one through death, that was definitely tragedy. Now he had a 3rd wife, who was also his niece, his partner in ambition, and possibly the key to everything he had ever wanted. The rogue prince had married his queen, and the realm would never be the same. The charm and the chaos walked hand in hand once more, and the stage was set for the conflicts that would define the rest of Daemon's life and tear Westeros apart in fire and blood. King Viserys I, Targaryen, was dying, though he refused to admit it, even to himself. The sickness had been creeping through him for years, slow and relentless. It started with small pains in his back, then spread to his fingers and toes. The flesh began to rot, bit by bit, until the Maesters had no choice but to cut away the dead parts. First a finger, then another, then a toe. The king was being consumed piece by piece, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Daemon watched his brother's decline with complicated feelings. Part of him grieved to see Viserys suffering. They had been brothers before they were rivals, friends before politics drove wedges between them. The boy who had shared his childhood, who had defended him when others criticized, who had tried his best to love Daemon. Despite everything, that boy was still there, somewhere beneath the crown and the decay. Daemon did not want to see him die this way, eaten alive by his own body. But another part of Daemon, the part he tried not to acknowledge even to himself, knew that Viserys' death would change everything. When the king died, Rhaenyra would take the throne. She was the named heir, proclaimed before the entire realm, when she was still a girl. Viserys had never wavered in that choice. never named one of his sons by Alicent as heir instead. Rhaenyra was his chosen successor, and Daemon was Rhaenyra's husband. When she became queen, he would finally stand at the center of power. The problem was that much of the realm did not want Rhaenyra on the throne. Westeros had never been ruled by a queen regnant. Women could inherit lands and titles, but the Iron Throne was different. It was supposed to pass from father to son, not to daughters. The Great Council that had chosen Viserys over Rhaenys had established that precedent, or so many lords believed. They had chosen the male line over the female, and they expected that tradition to continue. Queen Alicent and her father Otto Hightower had been working for years to undermine Rhaenyra's position. They reminded the lords of the realm that Viserys had sons, 3 healthy boys who carried the king's blood and the Targaryen name. The eldest, Aegon, was Viserys's firstborn son, born of his second wife, but a son nonetheless. By the traditional laws of inheritance, he should be heir. The fact that Viserys had named Rhaenyra first did not matter, or so the Hightowers argued. A king could change his mind. A king could recognize that the realm needed a male heir. But Viserys never changed his mind. Even as his body failed him, even as the pain grew worse and the Maesters cut away more pieces of him, he insisted that Rhaenyra was his heir. She would rule after him. That was his decision, and it would stand. The court split into factions because of this stubbornness. Those who supported Rhaenyra began wearing black, the colour of House Targaryen. Those who supported Aegon and the Hightowers wore green, the colour Alicent had worn when she first appeared at court as Viserys's intended bride. The blacks and the greens, they were called, and the division between them grew deeper with each passing year. Daemon positioned himself at the heart of the black faction. He had always been Rhaenyra's champion, even before he married her. Now he was her husband, her most important supporter, the man who would help her claim what was rightfully hers. He began preparing for the succession the way a general prepares for war, because he knew that was what it might become. War. He reached out to allies across the realm. He reminded the lords who had sworn oaths to Rhaenyra that those oaths still bound them. He spoke to commanders of garrisons and captains of ships, securing their loyalty, or at least their neutrality. He worked with Corlys Velaryon, his former comrade from the Stepstones, and now his father-in-law, through his marriage to Laena's memory and his stepdaughter's grandfather, to ensure the Valyrian fleet would support Rhaenyra when the time came. He was methodical and strategic, using all the skills he had learned in decades of military and political maneuvering. But Daemon was also Daemon, and that meant strategy was always mixed with impulse. He could plan carefully one day and do something reckless the next. He could be charming and diplomatic with one lord, then insulting and confrontational with another who annoyed him. His moods shifted like wind, and those around him never quite knew which version of Daemon they would get. His relationship with Rhaenyra's children from her first marriage was complicated. Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey were officially the sons of Lenor Velaryon, but everyone with eyes could see they were not. They had brown hair and brown eyes, not the silver and purple of Valyrians. Whispers said their true father was Harwin Strong, the commander of the City Watch who had been close to Rhaenyra. Whether this was true or not, the boy's questionable parentage weakened Rhaenyra's position. Her enemies used it as proof that she was unfit to rule, that she had dishonored her marriage vows and produced bastards. Daemon treated the boys as his stepsons because they were Rhaenyra's children, and that was enough. He was not warm with them the way he was with his own daughters, but he was not cruel either. He trained them in swordplay and taught them about dragons. He tried to prepare them for the battles ahead, both the literal ones and the political ones. They would need to be strong and smart and ruthless if they wanted to survive what was coming. With Rhaenyra, Daemon found something he'd never had in his previous marriages. She was his partner in a way that went beyond mere affection or political alliance. They understood each other. They were both Targaryens who'd spent their lives in the shadow of others' expectations, both driven by ambition and resentment, both willing to do whatever was necessary to claim what they believed was theirs. When they were together, they fed each other's fire rather than tempering it. But that partnership also made them dangerous. Two ambitious Targaryens working together, both convinced of their right to rule, both willing to break rules and traditions, both capable of charm and violence in equal measure. They were a force that could either save House Targaryen or destroy it, and no one knew which it would be. At Dragonstone, where Rhaenyra held court as Princess of Dragonstone and heir to the throne, Daemon built his own power base. He trained men and gathered weapons. He ensured the castle's defences were strong and its garrison loyal. He flew Caraxes over the island regularly, making sure everyone knew that the rogue prince and his bloodworm stood ready to fight. Dragonstone became the seat of the Black faction, the place where Rhaenyra's supporters gathered and planned for the succession. The tension in the realm grew worse as Viserys' health continued to fail. The king was confined to his chambers more often than not, too weak to hold court or attend to the daily business of ruling. The small council made decisions in his name, but everyone knew the real power lay elsewhere. Otto Hightower and Queen Alicent controlled the machinery of government in King's Landing. Daemon and Rhaenyra controlled Dragonstone and the loyalty of those who believed in her claim. The realm was split in two, and the king who should have been holding it together was too sick to stop it. There were moments when Viserys rallied, when he seemed to regain some of his old strength. During these periods, he would summon both sides to King's Landing and try to make peace between them. He wanted his family united. He wanted his daughter and his wife to reconcile. He wanted his brother and his sons to respect each other. But these hopes were fantasies, and everyone except Viserys seemed to know it. Daemon attended these family gatherings when summoned, playing the role of dutiful brother and loyal prince consort. He smiled at Queen Alicent and spoke politely to her sons. He pretended to see them as nephews rather than rivals. But the pretense fooled no one. When Daemon looked at Aegon, Viserys' eldest son by Alicent, everyone could see the calculation in his eyes. This boy was the threat. This boy was the one the Greens would try to put on the throne instead of Rhaenyra. This boy might have to die if it came to war. Aegon himself was not particularly interested in being king. He was young and more interested in wine and women than politics, but his mother and grandfather were interested for him. They saw him as their path to power, the tool they would use to take the throne from Rhaenyra. Whether Aegon wanted it or not did not matter. He was being positioned as the alternative heir, and that made him dangerous. The relationship between Daemon and Otto Hightower reached new levels of hostility during these years. They had never liked each other, but now they were open enemies. Otto saw Daemon as everything wrong with House Targaryen: ambitious, violent, unpredictable, corrupting Rhaenyra, and pushing her toward conflict. Daemon saw Otto as a scheming upstart who had used his daughter to manipulate the king, and was now trying to steal the throne for his grandson. Their confrontations in council meetings became legendary. Otto would suggest something, and Daemon would immediately oppose it, not always because the suggestion was bad, but because it came from Otto. Daemon would propose a course of action, and Otto would raise objections, pointing out flaws real and imagined. The other council members learned to sit quietly and let the two men argue, knowing that any attempt to mediate would only draw their ire. Viserys tried to keep them both in check, but he was too weak and in too much pain to truly control them. He would order them to make peace, and they would agree for his sake, but the peace never lasted longer than the meeting. As soon as they left the king's presence, the Cold War resumed. The maesters began warning that Viserys did not have much time left. Months, perhaps a year, if he was lucky. The succession was no longer a distant concern, but an immediate crisis. Whoever controlled King's Landing when Viserys died would have an enormous advantage. They would control the Red Keep, the royal treasury, the bulk of the royal forces. They could crown their chosen king or queen before anyone could stop them. Daemon urged Rhaenyra to move to King's Landing, to be present when her father died, so she could claim the throne immediately. But Rhaenyra hesitated. She trusted her father's word that she was heir, trusted that the lords who had sworn oaths to her would honour those oaths. She did not want to appear like she was waiting for Viserys to die, circling like a vulture. It would look bad, would make people think she was eager for her father's death. Daemon argued that appearances did not matter as much as power. They needed to be in position to act when the time came. But Rhaenyra held firm, and Daemon respected her decision, even though he disagreed with it. She was the heir, the future queen. He was her consort, her partner, but ultimately the choice was hers. So they remained at Dragonstone, waiting, preparing, watching kings. Landing from across Blackwater Bay, Daemon spent his time making sure their supporters were ready, making sure their dragons were healthy and battle-ready, making sure everyone knew that when Viserys died, Rhaenyra would be queen, and anyone who opposed her would face fire and blood. He trained with his sword every day, keeping his skills sharp. He was past 50 now, not young anymore, but still dangerous. Age had made him more careful in some ways, more willing to think before acting. But it had also made him harder, more willing to do whatever was necessary without regret. The charm was still there when he needed it, but the violence was always closer to the surface now. He had lost too much, seen too much, to have any illusions about how the world worked. His daughters Baela and Rhaena were growing into young women, fierce and intelligent, like their mother had been. He ensured they were educated properly, taught High Valyrian and history and the ways of dragons. They would be Targaryens, not helpless ladies waiting for men to decide their fates. He wanted them strong enough to survive whatever was coming. And something was coming. Everyone could feel it. The realm was holding its breath, waiting for the king to die, waiting to see which side would strike first, waiting for the storm that had been gathering for years to finally break. Daemon had lived through wars and political intrigues, had survived assassination plots and battles and his own mistakes. But this felt different. This felt like everything he had done, every choice he had made, every alliance he had forged had been leading to this moment. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent his entire life trying to be more than the spare, more than the second son, more than the king's brother. He had fought and schemed and married 3 times, all in pursuit of power and recognition. Now he finally had it. He was married to the heir to the throne. He stood at the centre of one of the most important political conflicts in Targaryen history. His name would be remembered for generations. But it had cost him everything. His relationship with his brother was damaged beyond repair. He carried the suspicion of murdering his first wife. He had lost Laena, the one person who might have given him actual peace. He was older, harder, more isolated than ever despite being surrounded by allies and family. The charm that had once come naturally now felt like a mask he wore, something he put on when needed, but that did not reflect what was underneath any more. Still, he did not regret his choices. Regret was for people who believed things could have been different. Daemon knew better. He was who he was, the rogue prince, the man who could inspire fierce devotion and deadly enmity, the warrior who led from the front and the schemer who plotted in shadows, the loving father and the suspected murderer, the charming prince and the brutal enforcer. All of it was true. All of it was Daemon. And when Viserys finally died, when the storm finally broke and the realm descended into war, Daemon would be ready. He had been preparing for this his entire life, even if he had not always known it. The dance of the dragons was coming, and the rogue prince would dance. He would fight for Rhaenyra's crown with everything he had, would burn anyone who stood in their way, would prove once and for all that Daemon Targaryen was not just the spare, not just the second son, but a force that could shape history itself. The gathering storm was about to break, and Daemon stood at its centre, waiting for the thunder. When the histories are written, when the masters record the great events of the age, Daemon Targaryen's name will appear on nearly every page of the Dance of the Dragons. But before we speak of that terrible war, before we examine the blood and fire that consumed the realm, we must step back and look at the man himself. Who was Daemon Targaryen? What drove him? What made him both beloved and feared, admired and condemned, a hero to some and a villain to others? The answer is not simple, because Daemon himself was not simple. He was a man of contradictions, a walking paradox who could be gentle and brutal, charming and cruel, loyal and treacherous, all within the span of a single day. Understanding. Daemon means accepting that all these things were true at once, that he contained multitudes, and that trying to reduce him to a single characteristic misses the point of who he was. Start with his charm, because that was perhaps his greatest weapon. Daemon had a gift for making people love him. It was not just his Targaryen looks, though those helped. It was not just his royal blood, though that mattered. It was something deeper, something in the way he made people feel when they were around him. He listened when you spoke. He remembered your name. He made you feel like you mattered, like you were important, like you were worth his time and attention. Like you were worth his time and attention. For someone of royal blood to treat common soldiers or city guards or servant girls as if they were equals was rare and powerful. This charm built him a base of support that went far beyond what his position alone could have created. The Gold Cloaks loved him not because he paid them well, though he did, but because he made them feel like warriors rather than thugs. The small folk of King's Landing cheered for him, not because he gave them bread, though sometimes he did, but because he walked among them and jested with them and seemed to genuinely enjoy their company. The men who followed him into battle in the Stepstones were loyal not just because he was a prince, but because he bled beside them and shared their dangers. But the same charm that won him supporters also masked something darker. Daemon's ability to make people feel special was not always genuine. Sometimes it was calculated, a tool he used to build loyalty and influence. He could turn on the charm like lighting a candle, and he could extinguish it just as quickly when someone was no longer useful or when his mood turned dark. Those who knew him well learned to be wary of his smiles, to wonder what he wanted when he was being particularly friendly, to recognize that his affection often came with strings attached. The violence was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Daemon was a warrior to his core, trained in combat from childhood and gifted with natural talent. He loved fighting. He loved the clarity of battle, where problems could be solved with a sword, and courage mattered more than politics. But his relationship with violence went beyond simple martial skill. There was a cruelty in him, a willingness to inflict pain that sometimes seemed to bring him pleasure. The purges he ordered as commander of the City Watch were not just about maintaining order. They were about demonstrating power, about showing that he could do whatever he wanted, that no one could stop him. The mutilations and public executions were designed to terrify as much as to punish. And while Daemon justified these actions as necessary for the safety of the city, there was always a sense that he enjoyed the fear he created, that the screams and the blood fed something dark inside him. This capacity for cruelty made him dangerous in ways that went beyond his skill with a sword or his dragon. People feared what Daemon might do if he felt threatened or insulted. They had seen him turn on enemies with a viciousness that was shocking even in a world used to violence. The suspicion that he had killed his first wife, whether true or not, hung over him because people could believe it. Daemon was capable of murder. Daemon was capable of doing terrible things to get what he wanted. Everyone knew this, even those who loved him. Yet, for all his darkness, Daemon was also capable of genuine affection and even tenderness. His love for his daughters was real. When he was with Baela and Rhaena, the masks fell away, and something softer emerged. He taught them with patience. He played with them when they were young. He wanted them to be strong and capable, not because they were tools for his ambition, but because he loved them and wanted them to survive in a dangerous world. The man who could order brutal punishments without hesitation could also spend hours telling his daughters stories and making sure they felt safe and loved. His grief over Laena's death was genuine too. He had cared for her, perhaps even loved her in the truest sense of the word. When she died, the pain was real and deep. He was not performing grief for an audience. He was actually broken by the loss, actually wounded in a way that his enemies and his reputation could not heal. It showed that beneath all the calculation and violence and ambition, there was still something human in Daemon, still a capacity to feel and hurt and mourn his relationship with Rhaenyra combined all these aspects of his character. He loved her, but the love was complicated by ambition and desire and the weight of years spent in shadow. She represented his last chance at power, his final opportunity to be something more than the spare. But she was also his family, his niece, whom he had watched grow from a girl into a woman, someone he genuinely cared about, even when his motives were mixed. Their marriage was a partnership built on mutual ambition, yes, but also on real affection and shared understanding of what it meant to be Targaryen. When we look at Daemon's impact on history, we see a man who shaped events far beyond what his formal position should have allowed. He was never king, never held the throne in his own right, but his influence on the realm was profound. As commander of the City Watch, he transformed that organization into an effective force and made himself beloved by the common people of King's Landing. As a military commander in the Stepstones, he proved himself a capable and courageous leader who could win impossible victories through skill and daring. As Rhaenyra's husband and chief supporter, he became one of the central figures in the greatest civil war House Targaryen ever faced. The Dance of the Dragons, when it came, bore Daemon's fingerprints on every battle. He was not the cause of the war. The seeds of that conflict were planted long before he married Rhaenyra, planted in the moment Viserys named his daughter heir, and then had sons by his second wife. But Daemon's presence made the war more vicious, more personal, more willing to embrace destruction in pursuit of victory. He pushed Rhaenyra toward conflict rather than compromise. He advocated for fire and blood when others counseled patience. He made enemies of those who might have been won over with diplomacy. Some historians blame Daemon for the worst excesses of the war. They say he corrupted Rhaenyra, turned her from a potentially wise and gentle queen into something harder and more ruthless. They point to his history of violence and cruelty as proof that he was a poison in the realm, a man whose ambition and darkness brought ruin to House Targaryen. These critics are not entirely wrong. Daemon did make things worse in many ways. His presence escalated conflicts. His willingness to embrace violence encouraged others to do the same. His hunger for power and recognition drove him to take risks that endangered not just himself, but everyone around him. But others see Daemon differently. They see a man who was loyal to his family when loyalty mattered most. A warrior who fought for his wife's claim when much of the realm opposed her. A dragon rider who embodied the old Targaryen spirit of fire and blood and conquest. These supporters argue that without Daemon, Rhaenyra would have been crushed by her enemies, that his strength and cunning were necessary to give her any chance at all. They point to his courage in battle, his skill as a commander, his willingness to risk everything for what he believed in. The truth, as it usually is, lies somewhere between these extremes. Daemon was neither pure villain nor unsung hero. He was a man shaped by his circumstances, by being born second in a world that valued being first, by having the blood and abilities of a king without the crown to match. That fundamental contradiction defined his entire life and drove many of his worst and best actions. Consider what it must have been like to be Daemon Targaryen, to grow up knowing you were special, that you had royal blood and dragon-riding heritage, that you were capable of great things. but also knowing that none of it mattered as much as it should, because you were not born first. To see your older brother receive all the attention, all the preparation for rule, all the respect that came with being heir. To watch him become king while you remained just the king's brother, important but not essential, valued but not quite enough. That experience would twist anyone. It would fill them with resentment and ambition, and a desperate need to prove they were more than their birth order suggested. Daemon's entire life was a struggle against that position, an attempt to carve out his own identity and power separate from being the spare. Everything he did, from commanding the city watch to fighting in the Stepstones to marrying Rhaenyra, can be understood as part of that struggle he was trying to matter. He was trying to be great. He was trying to be remembered. And he succeeded, though not in the way he might have hoped. Daemon is remembered, but as the rogue prince, a title that captures both his appeal and his danger. He's remembered as someone who could inspire fierce devotion, but who could never quite be trusted. Someone who could win impossible victories, but who might betray you tomorrow if it served his purposes. Someone who could be your greatest ally or your worst enemy, sometimes on the same day. The theories about Daemon's motivations and actions continue to fascinate people centuries after his death. Did he really kill Rhea Royce, or was her death truly an accident? Was his love for Rhaenyra genuine, or was she merely a path to power? Did he manipulate events to ensure Lenore Velarion's death so he could marry Rhaenyra? Or did that happen independently? These questions cannot be answered with certainty. The evidence is mixed, the witnesses are long dead, and Daemon himself never confessed to anything. What we can say is that Daemon had the capacity for all these things. He was capable of murder if he thought it necessary. He was capable of manipulation and scheming. But he was also capable of genuine love and loyalty. Both could be true at once. He could love Rhaenyra and see her as a path to power. He could grieve for Laena and still move quickly to his next marriage. Human beings are complicated, and Daemon was more complicated than most. Some modern readers and scholars try to psychoanalyze Daemon, to diagnose him with various conditions or personality traits. But this misses the point. Daemon was not a clinical case study. He was a product of his world and his circumstances, shaped by the values of Westeros and the specific pressures of being a Targaryen prince. In another time or another place, he might have been different, but in the world he inhabited, with the family he was born into, he became exactly what he became, the rogue prince, the man who embodied both the glory and the horror of House Targaryen. His legacy is complex and contradictory, much like the man himself. On one hand, he left behind chaos and division. His actions contributed to a civil war that killed thousands and brought dragons to the brink of extinction. His violence and cruelty caused real suffering for real people. His ambition destabilized the realm and made reconciliation harder at every turn. These are not small sins. These are the actions of someone who prioritized his own desires over the good of the kingdom. On the other hand, he left behind examples of courage and loyalty that inspired generations. His defense of Rhaenyra's claim, whether motivated by love or ambition, or both, showed what it meant to fight for what you believed in against overwhelming odds. His skill as a warrior and commander proved that Targaryens were still capable of the kind of conquest and glory that had built their dynasty. His love for his daughters and his genuine grief over losses showed that even the hardest men could still feel and care and be human. The small folk remembered him fondly long after his death. They told stories of the prince who walked among them, who remembered their names, who made them feel like they mattered. They conveniently forgot or excused the violence, focusing instead on the charm and the generosity. To them, Daemon was a hero, a prince who cared about ordinary people in a way that most nobles did not. Whether this image was accurate or not, it persisted and shaped how future generations thought about him. The nobles had more mixed feelings. Some families who had supported Rhaenyra venerated Daemon as a loyal champion who had fought for the rightful heir. Others who had opposed her saw him as a dangerous radical who had corrupted a potentially good queen and dragged the realm into unnecessary war. Still others simply saw him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition unchecked by wisdom or restraint. What is certain is that no one who encountered Daemon remained neutral about him. He inspired strong feelings, positive and negative, but rarely indifference. People loved him, or feared him, or hated him, or admired him, but they could not ignore him. That ability to command attention, to make people care, was perhaps his most consistent trait. From his youth to his final days, Daemon Targaryen made sure that people noticed him, that they remembered him, that his name would be spoken long after he was gone. In the end, Daemon Targaryen was the ultimate rogue prince because he refused to be contained by the role he was given. He would not accept being second. He would not quietly serve and support and fade into the background. He demanded to be seen and heard and recognized, and he was willing to do terrible things to make that happen. But he was also capable of inspiring genuine love and loyalty, of fighting bravely for causes he believed in, of caring deeply for those few people who managed to reach past his defenses to the complicated man underneath. He was magnetic and dangerous, thrilling and terrifying, compelling and destructive. He was charm and chaos, walking hand in hand, never quite predictable, never quite safe. He was exactly the kind of figure that makes history fascinating and tragic at the same time. A man who could have been great in a different way if he had been born in a different position, but who became great in his own dark and complicated fashion because of the position he was given. The stories about Daemon will be told for generations. Bards will sing of his courage and his crimes. Historians will debate his motivations and his impact. Common folk will tell their children about the rogue prince who rode the Blood Wyrm and fought for his queen. And through all these tellings and retellings, the truth will remain elusive, because Daemon himself was elusive, a man of contradictions who defied simple categorization. If you see Daemon's life differently after walking through it step by step, you are not alone. He was a man who could be understood in many ways, interpreted through many lenses. Some will emphasize his loyalty to Rhaenyra and his courage in battle. Others will focus on his violence and his questionable morals. Still others will try to balance both sides to see him as the complicated figure he actually was. All of these perspectives have merit. All capture some truth about who Daemon Targaryen was and what he meant. What cannot be denied is that he mattered. In a world full of lords and princes and powerful men, Daemon stood out. He shaped events. He changed history. He left a mark on the world that could not be erased. Whether that mark was ultimately positive or negative, is something each person must decide for themselves. But the mark exists, deep and permanent, carved into the history of Westeros with fire and blood, and the unmistakable signature of a man who refused to be forgotten. So share your thoughts on the Rogue Prince. Tell us what you think of Daemon Targaryen after hearing his story. Was he a villain who corrupted Rhaenyra and helped destroy House Targaryen? Was he a hero who fought for his wife's rightful claim against impossible odds? Was he something more complicated, a man capable of both great good and terrible evil, depending on the day and the circumstances? The comments are open, and the debate will continue as it has for centuries, because that is the legacy of Daemon Targaryen. Not answers, but questions. Not clarity, but complexity. Not simple judgments, but the enduring fascination with a man who was never simple, never easy, never safe, but always, always unforgettable. And if you want more deep dives into the hidden corners of Westeros and Essos, more journeys through the lives of those who shaped the world of ice and fire, you know what to do. There are countless stories still to tell, countless lives still to explore, countless mysteries still waiting to be examined. The Rogue Prince's tale is just one thread in the vast tapestry of this world, and there are so many more waiting to be pulled and followed to their ends. Thank you for walking this path with us, through charm and chaos, through fire and blood, through the complicated life of one of the most unforgettable figures in all of Targaryen history.